Okay, everybody, we have a guest. It's Seth,
Hello.
and he discovered some interesting stuff, especially regarding in Google Analytics for attribution. So, in the last couple months, obviously, GA4 has taken over from UA3, as we all know, and we've had big attribution problems. And like just common reports, we couldn't really figure out what was going on. Certain things were showing up, other things weren't. So, Seth took it upon himself to go in and debug both in GTM and GA4 through an account, and just want to hear about what you did
Yeah,
and what
absolutely.
you found.
So, definitely put a lot of hours into diving into GA4 and sort of exploring what's different from UA and sort of seeing where everything is coming in. And one of the biggest differences we found was in properties that have Google Signals enabled and Google Signals not enabled. If you're
Real quick, sorry to interrupt.
Go ahead.
Google Signals. Can you show people where that is?
I can. So, apologies for my head being turned all the way, but looking at other screens, it's not letting me. There we go.
So if you converted Google Analytics 4 from Universal Analytics, Google Signals is a default setting that is automatically integrated. Now, if you did not do that, though, because we didn't do that, we set up GA4 4, Google Signals was not on that.
It did not automatically enable Google Signals, but being that in the setup assistant, it's one of the steps. We looked through it, and Google Signals is what allows you to enable remarketing audiences in Google Ads, and that's something we wanted to do. So that's something we enabled in a lot of our accounts. It's just part of our standard procedure for, okay, we're moving over to GA4. Let's make sure these are all built out correctly so that we can utilize it to its full capacity.
And Google Signals, just to kind of give insight, it seems to me like it's Google Analytics 4 saying, okay, we have your audience data, but we're just going to go out further and look at audiences that have similar behaviors, similar events, similar patterns, and expand beyond that. Am I saying that correctly?
Yeah, so from what I know about it, or what I believe to be true, it's using Google's database of data, essentially, and sort of pulling customer information from across the web. So sort of aggregating it, but they don't want to just give that data to you. So that's why Google Signals also limits the access to some things, which we found the hard way, which I can get into.
Please, show us what you got.
Yeah, so bring back up the exploration. So on the left-hand side here, we have the exploration for the account that has Google Signals enabled. And on the right-hand side here, we have Google Signals not enabled.
Both same accounts, same client, right?
Same website. We're looking at the exact same conversion actions. I set up a segment here that's looking at the exact same things. They're both set up in the same Google Tag Manager container. It's just a duplicate tag sending it to different measurement IDs. So it's just going to different Google Analytics accounts to be processed separately. And you can see that they're the same because right here we're looking at their total events for the same date range, September 1st through September 8th. And they have the same event count for the same events.
So 72 and 72, they're both showing 6 events. Makes a lot of sense. No differences there.
Yeah. So what we're looking at here is like, what are the events that have happened and how many have happened? So that gives us some good information, but we'd like more than that. Where did those pages happen? Who did they happen to? Like, who committed those actions? So if we wanted to break this down and say, okay, how many sessions made up those actions? We can click sessions here and it'll break in sessions. Okay, there were 62 sessions bringing in 72 events. How about how many people actually made those events happen? So we can bring in total users and see 26 individual people making up 26 individual sessions made 27 of these value or trade form submissions.
Let me back up 1 second. So right now, we should tell people too, we're not looking at a report per se. We're looking at what, explorations?
Yeah. So the reporting in GA4 is a bit more, it's a bit more simplified to make it easier to approach if you look at just the general reports, but it's also a little bit limiting. So we found it really valuable to be able to use these explorations, which do give you a lot of data so long as you can see all the data. So this, you can get really customized in terms of what you're looking at. So if you wanted to see for a specific conversion action and do source medium over certain pages, you can get really specific about what you're looking at. So there's a lot of power in these.
Gotcha.
So that was on the account that did not have Google Signals enabled. And we're able to see all of this, no problem. And if we look here, we're still at the event count being 72. Now, if we look at the account that does have Google Signals enabled, and we try and do the same thing. So we have event counts, try and throw in, what did I add in first? Sessions.
Yep.
We'll see that it's still coming in, but if I bring in users, nothing. So it's thresholding the data, and this is to prevent privacy issues and whatnot, or so we're told from the Google Signals literature. But what this effectively means is you cannot drill down your data far enough to make a lot of the meaningful insights that we look to do. So if you look at the left, you can't see anything. You look at the right, look at all this data we can see. That's a pretty compelling case for, in my eyes, needing both, because it's important to have the remarketing lists. That's why we have Google Signals. So using those remarketing lists in Google Ads, but then we also want to be able to see what's coming of everything.
Okay, so you mentioned the red triangle. If you could show people, so on the left side, just to remind everybody, the left side is Google Signals enabled. That is Google's recommended setting inside of Google Analytics 4. Right side, you have Google Signals disabled, and you notice it's a green check mark. It shows unsampled exploration. This report is based on 100% of available data. So what I take this is that this is purely the data that we're getting from the people that are going to the website, which we had normally tracked. But on the left side, with the thresholding and the signals, again, it's like we have this net that we're trying to just go and capture more audience data that looks like people interacting with our site. And I want to make sure that I'm explaining that somewhat correctly.
Yeah, that seems to be right. And I had another example of this too with another one of our clients that shows up a little bit differently. So in this case, we already have our total users added in next to sessions. If you see here,
I love this swivel.
Total number. So I'm sure it's a little disorienting, but
wicca.
So the important thing here is the total number of conversions in this exploration is different. So the total number in our unsampled report here on the right is 164 sessions, let's say. And then over here on the left, it's 97. So if we're looking at the total number of conversions, for example, it's going to be completely different in the unsampled report versus the sampled report. And that means you're not going to be able to tell how effective certain conversion actions are on your site unless they meet a certain threshold. In some cases, I've seen it be near 50-ish. I've seen it be a little bit lower. But ultimately, you're going to have to reach a certain minimum. So if you have conversion actions on your site that are highly desirable, but they don't happen very frequently, you're going to be missing out on those unless you have an account that doesn't have Google Signals enabled.
So basically, again, Seth went to a different account on both screens here, left and right, still keeping thresholding and Google Signals on the left, while non-thresholding and no Google Signals on the right. Same date range, same conversion actions. This is what's interesting on this one to me, because you already covered it. On the left hand, you only have 2 events coming in. But on the right-hand side, you have 9 events. And you set up events to go through both of these GA4 properties the exact same way. It's like, that to me is huge, because if we're using Google Signals, and I've been in front of clients looking for our event names and conversions and everything, and they weren't there. And it's like, did we not set these? Did we not set them up? We were going through our developers like, hey, why aren't these coming up in the report? But they're just not showing up because of the saturation of data. The Signals is just taking this conglomeration of unsampled, is it unsampled? Whatever, unverified data, grouping it in and just saturating our metrics. And like Seth said, you can't determine, like, there's no click to text on your Google Signals side. There's no contact us form. There's no chat start. And those, at least for this business, are super important metrics to at least know of, So That's what's crazy to me. And yeah, so you kind of touched on this at the end of what you said until I rudely cut you off about what should people do? Like, you have one signals, one non-signals. Google Analytics says signals. We say otherwise because of clarity of reporting. What should people do? Should they use both? Should they use one? And maybe when is that applicable?
Sure. So in my eyes, the only time you would want to have an analytics account that has Google Signals enabled would be when you are trying to use remarketing audiences in Google Ads. That is the only application so far that I've seen it to be useful for. Literally any other occasion, if you're not using Google Ads remarketing audiences, I would say you don't even need to have an account that has Google Signals enabled. If you want to have Google Signal audiences, remarketing audiences, and also be able to look at all of your data, having two Google Analytics accounts makes the most sense to me, because you can still see all of the data on the one account and you can still use the remarketing audiences on the other. Some arguments against it, because you could slow down your site some very small fraction of a percent, but you can get around that by doing a server-side tag manager. There's ways to get around it, but I found the most value in having both set up identically. It does make it a little bit bulkier if you want to make edits to conversion tracking or something like that. You have to make sure it's done on both sites or both accounts. But otherwise, yeah, if you're not using remarketing audiences in Google Ads, you don't need to use Google Signals.
Interesting. Honestly, the more we talk about it, I feel like you have to have both, because I mean, this is what we got from our experience. We would think it's the same, but it sounds like you need to have both GA4 properties, because I can't really think of an instance where it's going to hurt you to use remarketing lists for Google Ads. Like, that's just classic audience building and remarketing 101. Whether you want to exclude audiences, target specific audiences, you should have it. But I also can't think of an instance where you don't want to know your actual data at all times. So it's like, I think you need both, and then you got to test it, which is cool, because we had discussed weeks ago, shoot, what are we going to do with all this thresholding and sample data? And Seth had the idea, well, let's just make two GA4 properties, one with data signals and one without. And this is why we're showing it to you guys. And I feel like this is super important, because if you have Google Ads conversion tracking utilizing GA4, not utilizing GTag or any other custom conversions you have set up, I mean, that's what Google's machine learning and smart bidding is going to spend your money on, especially with all the smart bidding strategies like maximize conversions, maximize conversion value. If you're applying TROAS or TCPA to anything like that, e-commerce, lead gen, whatever, yeah, you need them both. You heard it here first.
Yeah, I agree. Capture all the data you can, because why not?
Yeah. Anything else to show? We didn't talk about debugging as much, like your process of debugging.
Yeah, so we do a lot of our conversion tracking set up right in Google Tag Manager, because we find it to be the most accessible. But we also try and parallel that. If we're debugging something in the preview tool using Tag Manager, we'll also want to check using the debug tool in Google Analytics and make sure they're coming in correctly, because an event can fire in the preview tool and Tag Manager but not make it to your analytics account. So using both can help you make sure it's getting there. The one thing that we did find between those two is that the preview tool is pretty instantaneous, but the GA4 debug tool is quite slow, and it would take sometimes up to even 5 minutes for it to register a conversion action. So I guess give it time, be patient, but it does make debugging a little bit more cumbersome.
Yep. Cool. Seth B., David Feldman-Makrias, thank you guys.